Hello everyone and welcome to the first session of our new format, the lecture series here on Twitch. My name is Katharina, I am the project specialist for future talents in the German studios, and I will be your host for this session. As the lecture series is part of our Future Talent initiative, we especially welcome young talents to the stream who want to pursue a career in games. Today marks the first edition of the Ubisoft lecture series, and we are starting things off with a panel to answer basic questions on AAA game development and the work at Ubisoft. The following lectures will go more into detail on a certain development topic and consist of a presentation and a Q&A afterwards. We are planning to keep the streams as a VOD on our Twitch channel, so everyone who cannot make it can rewatch it if they missed it. Today you can of course also drop all your questions related to working in the games industry in the chat, and we are going to answer them. And at this point, I would like to introduce my guests for today, who are Philipp Sonnefeld, senior producer at Ubisoft Düsseldorf, and Alexander Rausch, senior recruiter also at Ubisoft Düsseldorf. And maybe the both of you would like to introduce yourselves. So, Philipp, go ahead.
Hi everybody, I'm Philipp. Very happy to be here today. Very excited about this new lecture series. I think it's going to be really interesting. So I'm a senior producer in the company here. I've been around since 2013, so a little over 10 years at this point. I've been on a bunch of really interesting projects. I've been working on For Honor, for example. I've been working on Assassin's Creed. It's a really interesting place to be, and obviously where a lot of people can find, how they marry their passion and their job. So it's great.
Okay, great. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex. I'm a senior recruiter here at Ubisoft Düsseldorf. I joined the company about 2.5 years ago. I work for over more than 10 years in recruitment overall. My main job, of course, is supporting our teams to fill their open positions, to get the best talent to fill the open positions. And for example, I'm working with our Rainbow Six Siege team, I'm working with Ubisoft Connect team, and I'm also supporting, for example, the Anno team in filling their positions.
Yes, thank you very much for being here today and answering all the questions on AAA game development and what it's like to work at Ubisoft. But maybe one fun question to begin with and to break the ice. What is your favorite game and why?
You want to go first?
I think, obviously there's many games that I really enjoy. I think right now and for a long time at this point, most of my time has been going into the Blizzard MOBA, which is Heroes of the Storm. So I just really enjoy playing it. A lot of my friends many of my friends still play it, and so it's a great time to be, playing in a group, playing together, even if we lose sometimes.
Yeah, for me, favorite game ever. So yeah, tough question because I'm playing so many games. I've played so many games, but if I have to single one out, I think my most favorite game ever is Diablo 2, I think. The old one from Blizzard Entertainment, which I always come back to time after time. So I like action RPG games. I also like the more modern ones, like Grim Dawn, for example, Path of Exile, but Diablo 2. Somehow I always come back to this one, and yeah, enjoy a session even after all these years it has been out.
All these years it has been out. Now I have to out myself as someone who enjoys a fairly new game, which is the Disney Dreamlight Valley. I'm all up for the cozy games. So it's been out not that long, but I have like a lot of playing hours for that. So I guess at least at the moment that's my favorite game.
Nice.
Yes. But from gaming and playing games to developing games, let's talk about how AAA games are made at Ubisoft and also how to get your foot into the industry. So now we really come to the questions that are the basic of today's stream. A few years back, when I was looking for a job for when I finished my studies, I had the feeling that not a lot of people were aware of the games industry having like jobs. Like games were there. Of course, people are there who develop the games, but you don't really think of this. And I feel like in the past few years, this has changed a lot. So Alex, what do you think? Are people nowadays more aware of game development being like a real job?
Yeah, I think definitely that is the case. That is more common now to maybe work in games or to work on games. I think it's also has something to do with how the game industry developed in the past years. So gaming developed from being a very niche hobby into more of a mainstream entertainment. The game industry now has outgrown the movie industry, has outgrown the music industry, so it's more like a mainstream form of entertainment now. I think that plays, of course, into it, and also that we now have different universities, different schools offering courses aimed towards making games, towards game development, aiming at people who maybe want to pursue a career in games. I think that it's also to it that it's also more recognized as an industry, and also especially in Germany, where we don't have so many big AAA game companies, but we're getting there, yes.
Yeah, and AAA, you just named it. Ubisoft is a AAA developer, which means that we are producing the biggest type of games. Is there a difference between developing AAA games and developing, for example, in an indie studio?
Yes, so there is. The setup is quite different. So I think what is different in AAA, of course, team sizes are much bigger. So you have much bigger teams who might be distributed across different locations. So in Ubisoft, for example, we have different studios working on a single game, for example. And also the whole project landscape and company landscape is more complex in AAA, of course. And in indie studios, you have smaller teams who maybe work all at one location. Maybe you have like 20 people, for example, working on a game. And also regarding at the jobs, I think in an indie studio, many people wear different hats. So for example, if you're a programmer in an indie studio, you might be working on different topics. So you might be working on UI programming, on gameplay programming, on online programming. And this would be like 3 different jobs in a AAA company, because in AAA people are much more specialized in what they do. That goes, for example, also for the art department. So in indie, you might be working on characters, you might be working on 3D props, you might be working on UI art, all as one artist in an indie studio. And this would also be like 3 different jobs in Ubisoft, where we have much more specialized teams, but who are still working as a cross-functional team. So also in Ubisoft, you will, as a programmer, you will be working with designers, because most of the teams are set up cross-functional to deliver a feature or the game in the end. So you will also have this in AAA studios. But the setup is different, and the specialization is much deeper in AAA.
Thank you. Now that we've talked a bit about the difference between bigger game, smaller game projects, Philip, maybe you can explain how we are producing games. So what are the main steps that we take for the AAA games we produce?
So when we're talking about really AAA game development, typically a game project will go through, broadly speaking, 4 phases. And before I name them, I'll say that in some cases, they also sort of overlap and flow into one another. Maybe not all parts of the game are in the same phase at the same time. And sometimes that can be useful, sometimes that's not useful. But broadly speaking, you would start with a conception phase, where you really sort of establish the basic premise of the game, some of the core game loop, and a step that I think is very important that sometimes is not taken into account so much is also what the game is not. Like what are we trying to do with the game? What are we explicitly not trying to do with the game? So that's the conception phase, during which you typically have a big emphasis on design, on really early and rough prototyping to kind of check some of your most fundamental assumptions and things like that. And then after conception, you would go into pre-production. So in pre-production is where you start to, let's say you've landed kind of on the game that you're trying to make. You feel like you have a good idea of what the core game loop is going to be like, and you've also validated somehow that it's like a good project, a good market fit, and so that you think that people will really enjoy the game. Maybe you've done really early user testing with your prototype, and so in pre-production, what you're trying to answer is, how do we turn this into really a game, a product sort of at scale, right? If the idea is that, maybe let's say, it's a shooter game, and maybe it's something in, let's say, like a Tom Clancy brand, then, okay, how are we going to turn this into a product that people will enjoy? It's going to need a story, it's going to need multiple maps, it's going to need a number of features. And so in pre-production, you basically determine what of these you're going to add to the product and how you're going to be able to produce them at scale. So you would be concerned with creating or setting up the pipeline and the tools for later for the content teams, for the artists and designers to use. And you would also establish what kind of features you want to produce in the game. And so that kind of encompasses the pre-production phase. And then you enter into production. So at this point is typically when a lot of teams ramp up, meaning they increase their team size. And that's when many people will work in parallel to really raise the quality of the game, right? Maybe you might have a more complete prototype at the end of pre-production, which then is taken as a basis for the production phase to say, okay, now we've proven a certain level of quality within maybe one feature or maybe within one map, and now we're going to roll this out for the remaining levels, for example. So production is typically when you go up to like a beta stage or even beyond. And then typically that ends with, so after that, you would start to operate or release the game, right? So now depending on what kind of game it is it something that is intended to be, running into like a seasonal sort of live phase where you have multiple patches planned, or which is becoming more rare, I would say, something that is just like a one and done where you just release it and then that's it. So depending if there is an operation phase, that's typically what you would do. And then you would obviously want to incorporate player feedback as much as possible. And you can already see where that's a good example of how these phases can overlap, because, for example, during production phase, you would obviously already do user testing. You would already do technical testing to make sure that your infrastructure is in place and is robust. And you would do things like a closed beta or even open beta to collect player feedback and to really confirm that your infrastructure is operating at scale. So in that sense, you're already operating the game, meaning that it's already out there for some people to test and to play. But yeah, then the release is typically when you have like the commercial. Now is when everybody that wants to can go out and buy it. So those are typically the 4 phases that we go through. It's like conception, pre-production, production, and then operation of the game.
That sounds very comprehensive and like a lot of work. So AAA games are a lot of work. Can you give an estimation on how long it takes to develop such a big game?
So typically you would look at between 3 and 5 years, probably for let's say the majority of the games. And it's also going to depend a lot on whether you're talking about a game that's being made by a team that's already in place, like a team that's already established. Maybe it's a sequel to an existing game or happening within the same brand, same sort of type of game. That means they're going to reuse the engine. They're going to reuse a lot of what was built in the previous product. So that tends to obviously reduce the risk and reduce the time it takes to develop a AAA game. The longer games are the ones where you would have a new technology or a new platform, like a new console generation or VR, for example. Or when you maybe start out with a certain idea or a certain concept of the game, but then in user testing, it turns out that it's not really what people are looking for. And so in that case, you would obviously want to adjust the kind of game that the team is making, more or less fundamentally. And that obviously also can increase the duration that it takes to finish the game.
And big projects need big teams, a lot of skilled people who create the game. Can you explain the main departments that are involved in game development and also what they do?
Yeah, so in our game production teams, you would typically have your programmers, designers, artists, testers, and producers. So I will skip, for the sake of the answer, I will skip the many support teams that it also takes.
Yeah.
Because I would say one of the benefits of working in a studio like Ubisoft or in a company like Ubisoft is that you obviously have a lot of support teams operating around the production team that actually enables, you know, your game programmers to focus on making the game, and they don't have to focus on making sure that there's a computer under their desk that works well, or that, you know, they don't have to take care of company finances or whatever. So, but if you're talking about the game production teams, so as a programmer, I mean, actually, let me start with the designers. When you're making a game, the designers are, I would say, broadly speaking, the ones that kind of make up the rules of the game, right? You as a designer, you would try to come up with a fun game loop that is engaging for people, that people want to play, and that is fun for them to play. And so that takes a certain rule set. And so designers are typically the ones that come up with the rule set. Then as a programmer, you would be the person that implements the rules, right? And that puts them into game code form, let's say. Then as artists, if you think of it, let's say, like it works in board games. In a board game, you always have the game loop and then some kind of theme, and the two have to go together to create a really compelling game, right? Mm-hmm. And so in that sense, it's similar here. If you just have a very, let's say, if there's no theme to the core game loop, then it's kind of, you know, it's a little bit weird. It can be in a vacuum. So that's where a lot of the content and the art comes in, right? That's when you have story, that's when you have narrative, that's when you have actually an environment in which the game takes place. You know, take Avatar, for example, where that plays an enormous role, right? So that's basically the realm of the artists and the content producing teams. And then you have the testers, obviously. So again, when we're talking about the game rules, the testers are the ones to make sure that the rules are robust, mm-hmm. right? That there's no loopholes. That if the designer says, well, as a player, you know, this is what you do, and then this is what happens in the game, the tester makes sure that this is actually the case. And then you have production, you know, people like me, where I would say we're concerned with creating a collaborative environment for these big teams where they can actually succeed in what they're trying to do. Mm-hmm. Because obviously, one can never succeed without the other. So we need to make sure that there's communication and that there's, let's say, processes where we talk about, okay, this is how we want to work together, right? This is what, you know, I expect of you, and this is what you can expect of me, and this is how we can create like a successful game, or this is how we can create results that are going to be fun for players. Yeah. And then obviously production also is concerned with making sure the whole thing stays within certain constraints of budget, time, and quality.
Mm-hmm. And Alex already explained that AAA game development needs specialists, people who really are experts in a certain aspect of their profession. But maybe you can still talk a bit about the most important skills, for example, for a programmer and a designer and an artist and a tester, a producer. So what are the most important skills, even though we need specialists?
So for programmers, I would say a large majority of the programmers that we have in the company are writing in C++. So that's kind of their baseline, where if you have a really solid knowledge of C++, then that's going to be a really good benefit for you. It's also important, saying that, is that you are able to write really clean and easy to read code. Right? It's not so much about what is it that you alone can achieve with the code that you're writing. Mm-hmm. And it's more about, is what you're creating usable and readable by other people? And is it something that maybe a year from now someone else can go look at, and maybe that someone else is yourself, can look at and still kind of make sense of it, mm-hmm. right? Because as you can imagine, in these large teams where just a lot of code is being produced every day, it's very important that there's sort of certain standards being adhered to, and so that there's readability and maintainability, reusability in the code that you're able to produce. So I think to kind of practice that, I would say a good way is to be familiar with a lot of other people's code and be able to understand what makes their other people's code easy to read, and then try to incorporate that into your own practice. Moving on to designers, I would say as a designer in the company, you're going to spend a lot of time explaining the concepts that you're designing and also documenting them. So I think making sure that you're able to, or practicing your ability to explain difficult concepts, maybe visualizing them in like diagrams and charts, and also documenting them in like a concise way, because obviously if every feature that you design requires people, to read through an entire manual, then it can be difficult for people to understand, right?
Yeah.
And if it's difficult for people to understand, then it's difficult for them to implement, and then it's also difficult for players to kind of have fun with it. If it's, if you have to if there's a big sort of cognitive barrier before you can enjoy a feature. So again, as a designer, there's a lot of communication and documentation involved. So if you have a knack for that, I think that's another benefit. As an artist, you are going to often be under certain constraints, right? Where there's very few, let's say, subfamilies of artists where you can just dial up the quality all the way to as much as you would want to, right? I mean, maybe in character art that can be the case if we're talking about like current gen or next gen projects, but a lot of the time you're gonna have to live with, models can only be so detailed, right? Or we can only have so many of them, or maybe we can only use, so many channels or so much memory, or so obviously there's going to be tools and programmers and technical artists that will be able to help you with that. But being able to produce something that looks natural in the setting of the game, meaning that is something where as a player I go, oh yeah, I think that belongs here, right? Or it makes sense for this to be here. Being able to have that kind of that eye to see, the thing that I'm producing, the piece of the asset that I'm making, logically and naturally fits into the game world, and still being able to fit that under the constraints of the project, and let's say being effective and efficient, like professional about the way that you're creating it, meaning that you're able to produce this kind of result under the constraints that you're given. And well, I'm still a producer, sorry, so that you're able to do it quickly also, is going to be, I would say, like a standout talent for a great artist. And you were asking about testers as well. For testers, I think just an unwavering curiosity and a sort of a mind to challenge everything that you see can be really interesting and useful in the job. Something that, maybe if you can sort of retain this ability to sort of project yourself in the mind of what it is like to play the game for the first time. That's something that, well, inevitably we kind of lose while working on the project because we see it every day. But retaining that ability or having that ability in the first place is really important. Yep. And then, of course, looking at, again, ways to being able to explain like a bug or the steps to reproduce a bug, or even having a suggestion of why you think it might, why you think a malfunction might occur, because maybe you understand the systems from discussing with the team. So that can also help tremendously, because I think a lot of the time, I think testers can be extremely valuable as like the first sort of line of defense. You really don't ideally want your senior programmers to spend like 5 hours or even 5 days chasing a bug when maybe your tester can already see, or have ideas why something might happen.
Yeah.
So I think that would be like an excellent tester has an idea of, maybe it's because of this, or maybe it's because of that thing that I made, and will include that in their bug report. And finally, producers. Well, producer, I would say again is very heavy on communication, and like all kinds of communication.
Yeah.
You're going to have to rely on like written communication, spoken communication. So you want to be practiced in those things. You want to understand how will people hear the things that I'm saying. So you have to have this kind of ability of putting yourself into their shoes. And and then beyond that, you go into a practice of leadership, practice of being able to stand in front of people and kind of telling them where to go.
Yep.
Even if sometimes you don't yourself know so well whether it's the right call, but sometimes that's what it takes.
Okay. Thank you very much. So much for the hard skills. But we all know that there's much more to working in a big company, working with people. So let's talk a bit about the soft skills needed for working in the games industry.
So I think, and you know, I've talked about it in just before. I think if I look at some of the postmortems that we do for projects, for game productions, a lot of the time they cite problems with communication, where maybe the game vision wasn't clear, or expectations were not communicated, or there was a conflict based on a misunderstanding between people, or a pipeline was not properly in place because, you know, one side never told the other or didn't explain it in ways that the people could really understand what was the problem. So I think as a soft skill, I would describe it as, can you bring a healthy dose of looking at what's happening and going, hang on, are we still doing the right thing in the right way? Or should we kind of take a step back and look at it and talk about what's working, what's not working? So essentially for me, this is kind of what I think about when we talk about teamwork and communication, is a lot about understanding what you need in your role and finding the right words to ask for it to the right people.
Okay, so as for many things in life, communication is key. Thanks a lot, Philip. Alex, you as a recruiter, maybe I can ask you the question, what are you focusing on when people are applying? So what is more important, for example, the education or having a degree or the portfolio, especially for junior positions? What are you focusing on?
So, of course, it's a mix of all of the three things you mentioned that we are looking for, but I think especially for junior positions, so what is important, of course, having some kind of portfolio, especially if you're applying for an art position, for example, is important. So we want to see what you already worked on, where your strengths are, how your style is, for example, if you're talking about art positions. So this is important for us. We also want to see what kind of skills you already bring. We also want to see what kind of skills you would still need to learn. We are not so much focused on the kind of degree or the kind of education you got the skills from. So we are more looking at the skills per se and not so much where they are coming from. So this is important that is what we are looking at, for example, to kick off a recruitment process for you. Of course, this is just the first impression we will get by your application, for example. We might get interested in your portfolio. We might get interested in your CV, the skills you list there. We might get interested also in your cover letter, of course. And then we can kick off a process, have a first interview, talk about what you already worked on, and then take it from there. But I think from the selection you gave me, like portfolio, skills is important. Yes, of course. What kind of degree you bring is not super important in our industry.
Okay. And you just mentioned you can talk about what experience the people have. Do I need work experience, especially when I'm applying for a position in AAA or at Ubisoft?
If you need work experience or not, of course, it heavily depends on the position you're applying for. Of course, if you're applying for like a senior position, of course, you need the work experience. But I think today we are focusing more on the junior side. So for junior positions, you don't need to have work experience in a studio or in a AAA studio that you need to bring. Of course, every piece of practical experience that you can already bring to the job is important and is beneficial to you if you apply. So I think the gaming industry per se is a very practical industry. Everyone in the team is adding something to the game. So we want to see what you worked on. And this does not have to be in kind of a professional context. So if you are coming right off from university, for example, maybe you had some university projects you worked in. Maybe you have some side projects that you were doing that are related to gaming or that are related to what we are looking for. So it does not need to be working for a company. It can be any project, anything you worked on. And the advice I can give is put this in your resume, put this in your portfolio so that we can take a look. And this is what it's really interesting to us. But of course, you don't have to bring the work experience. You can learn a lot here. You can learn the work experience. You can learn how to navigate a big company, how to navigate a big project, of course. You need to bring some basic skills, of course, but also there's a lot we can teach. And most of the times, I think it's also about the mindset. So if you're open to learn, open to develop, if you know what you are already bringing to the company, but if you also know what you need to still learn, that is also important. So you are a self-reflective person, then we can teach a lot, and then you don't need to have worked in a professional gaming studio environment before applying with us.
Okay, thank you. And just to close this chapter, because we've talked a lot about skills and work experience and soft skills and portfolio, what would be for a junior position the priority ranking when someone is applying? So what are you focusing on most to least?
Okay, so I think there are two things that are equally important. So first of all, of course, what kind of skills do you bring? Already, do you have a portfolio? Can we see some of your work? But what is equally important is the soft skills side. That is also very important for us when we are hiring for junior positions. Because, like Philip said, working in the gaming industry is also a lot about teamwork. It's a lot about communication. So we also looking for the right soft skills in this regard. So can you work with a cross-functional team, for example, as a programmer? Can you work with designers, for example? How is your communication, for example? Do you know what you bring? Do you know what you need to learn? And for example, do you bring an open mindset to develop, to improve? This is also what we are looking for. So I think the skills you bring, the portfolio you have, and your soft skills are very important. Where you have the education from, or if you already worked in the industry or not. Of course, it can be like a plus if you already bring some work experience, of course, but it's not mandatory. So I think it's the mix of the skills and the hard skills and the soft skills we are looking for. And don't underestimate the soft skills. So like Philip said, you can be the best programmer in the world, but you also need to be able to work with other people, to be able to document your stuff, to have a clean code, etc. So to be a fit for this whole team environment.
Okay, thank you. And you said that, of course, for artists, you need a portfolio. It's very commonly known. But do I also need a portfolio as a programmer or designer?
It's not really requested for by us to hand in a portfolio if you're a designer or a programmer. So, for example, if you're a game designer and you're applying, it's not that common that you add a portfolio to your application. As a programmer, we do not request a portfolio, but if you have a GitHub link or something to point us towards the projects you worked on, could be work-related projects, could be projects you worked on as a side project, for example, that's very interesting to us. Our programmers love to take a look. Also, of course, not because of, for example, what you worked on as a programmer, but also how you worked on it. So how does your code look like? What patterns do you use? That is something that is very interesting to us and can be very beneficial for your application. If we have, for example, a GitHub, send us the link so that we can have a look.
Thank you. And I think there is a second thing that we maybe need to clarify on when applying. So portfolio is the one thing, but assessment. Are you doing an assessment for every position, for especially every junior position?
We are not doing assessments per se for every position. Depends a little bit on job family. Like you said, for art position, it's standard to have some kind of art test or some kind of assessment during the recruitment process. But also if you're for example, applying for a position in the programmer job family, you can also expect at some point in the recruitment process that there will be a tech challenge or a coding challenge that we will send you that you will work on. So we will also have some kind of assessment there. For other job families, like for example, project management, it can happen, but it's not very common that we send out something. So it's more common for art and also for programming, yes.
Okay. And now that we know what's important when applying for a job at Ubisoft and which departments are involved in game development, Alex, do you think there are like evergreen jobs, so things that will always be needed in game development?
Evergreen jobs, that is a good question. But the first thing that comes to mind, I think, when you talk about evergreen jobs, it also, Philip touched on it, like if you're a programmer, you have solid C++ experience, I think, this is quite like an evergreen job. So I think that we are always in need, for example, for programmers. But also, it's hard to pinpoint it in a special job, for example. Also, game design, of course, is important. It is in every game, so you need to have a solid game loop. You have to work on that. So also, game design is very important. QA is also very important. And also, with the game teams getting bigger and bigger, also project management jobs, I think, are always in demand for those projects as well. So it's a little bit hard to pinpoint because I think in game development everything is very interconnected and every part I think is important. But of course, like C++ programmers is something we need currently and we will need in the future as well, I think. So this, I think, is like an evergreen job, for example.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a question in the chat, which was if a Dutch-speaking person should learn German to work at Ubisoft Germany.
That is a
good question.
Maybe you That is a good question, yeah, because of course we are thinking about Ubisoft Germany. Yeah, we might be a company in Germany. What is our company language? So our company language is English. We are an international company. You don't need any German in your day-to-day. So as a Dutch person, when you're applying here, you don't need to learn any German, so the whole recruitment process will be in English, your day-to-day will be in English, and I don't know the exact number, but I think we have about people from over 50 countries working in the German studios alone, so you will find very international teams here and a very international work environment.
Thank you very much. We also have a question, what are evergreen jobs? Never heard of it. That was just my way of asking if we have jobs that will be there like forever. So evergreen, like you will always need this. And as Alex said, most probably C++ programmers are the evergreenest jobs in the industry.
Yes, I think we have a lot of evergreen jobs. So all the jobs we have are important. But if you're talking about evergreen, so what will always be in demand, I think C++ programmers, yes, are definitely ones to mention.
Martin is also asking, you mentioned that soft skills are really important. Could game jam experiences be counted as good experiences?
Yes, definitely. Because I think game jams are beneficial to you in two different ways. Because first of all, you're working on games. You can build your portfolio also by attending game jams. So you get like real life project experience. And you also get the experience of working in a team environment. So not just working as a solo developer, for example, but you will be interacting, for example, with designers, with programmers, maybe with someone also testing, with someone doing or filling the project management role. So you will have a mini gaming project that you have there. So that would really be beneficial to your soft skills, but also for portfolio building. So highly recommended, yes.
Thank you. And Kiki is asking, what about preparing for an internship application? I think maybe this is going into the direction of portfolio and assessment. So how does an internship application look like for Ubisoft and what to prepare for that?
Well, I think an internship application is not that much different from a regular application. So the general advice would be, of course, have a close look at the job ad. So read it thoroughly, see what is required. And before you prepare your application, and then, of course, if requested, we need a portfolio, we need an easy-to-read CV. What also helps, especially for internship and junior positions, is a cover letter. Some people ask, is a cover letter really required nowadays? I think it's a good. Maybe it's always also in the questions there, but I think it's a good way to build a bridge between your experience and your CV and the position. So it's the cover letter is not for repeating what is already in your CV, but it's maybe talking about what of your skills, what of your experiences are a good fit to the position and the requirements. What things do you still need to learn? So it's building like a bridge between your experience and the job ad and the requirements in the job ad.
Thank you. And we have just been talking about assessments, and you said that for programmers, sometimes assessments are done. And we have a question, if these coding assessments are live tasks or if they can be done at home in your own time.
Depends a little bit from team to team, but the most common way we are doing those coding challenges is that we will send you a test that you can work on at home in your free time. So we will send you like a mini project, you will work on it, you will send us your solution back, our hiring team will have a look at your solution and then discuss the solution in a follow-up interview.
Okay, and there is one more question in the chat. What is important in a portfolio as an environment designer, for example? Game engine experience and how well a project is done aesthetically and technically.
Well, so first of all, what is important in your portfolio? So I think go for a less is more approach. So only put like your best work into your art portfolio. Also important is show us the different steps you have been going through to reach your artwork, for example, so that we can see, okay, how did you develop your artwork? What steps did you go through? If it's like a project where multiple people work on, tell us what parts you worked on, for example. And then, of course, if you're asking for like special engine experience in the job ad, for example, of course, you can tailor it maybe towards the requirements in the job ads. If you have different pieces you can choose from, and we are asking for, I don't know, a special engine you have experience in, or a special style we are looking for. If you have this information from the job ad, you can maybe also tailor your portfolio a little bit towards what is asked for in the job ad.
I think you can also, I mean, that's what you're saying, but also if you know what project you're applying for, if you know maybe what brand the project is serving, then you want to make sure that maybe if you're applying for an avatar project, that the portfolio you're including does not only consist of medieval fantasy assets.
Right.
I mean, it's great when you can do that, and if that's what you have, then include that. But if you have the ability to tailor, like you said, Alex, your portfolio a little bit more towards, what if I have a mix of like sci-fi and nature stuff in there, maybe then that's what I show, if that's the project I'm applying for.
Yeah, right. And that also, to add on to this, maybe it's also a portfolio can be top notch, but it's like a totally different style, for example, in comparison to what the style of the game is, like you said with Avatar, for example. Then, of course, your portfolio could not be a match then, no matter how the quality is. So if you have the ability to do this, tailor it towards the position, see what style we are looking for, and then hand in your art portfolio for the position.
Okay, thank you. We have another question in the chat. I'm not sure if you can answer this, but I will still read it out. So here's someone who wants to work as a level designer, and they are learning the theory part from online videos and YouTube, and trying to implement the things that they learned in Half-Life 2, Doom, Skyrim, and Fallout maps. and they would like to build a portfolio that shows the level design skills with these implemented maps for the games. Do you think this is enough to land a junior level design job at Ubisoft? Or if not, what other learning paths would you advise?
Well, I think it's a good point to start, of course. To learn level design by YouTube videos, applying your skills then with different games and tools that are available. But I think to add on to this would be then to go the path of maybe attending game jams or maybe join a group that is modding a current game, for example, to apply this also a little bit more into like a project development team environment to create something new, because yeah, like I said, it's a very practical industry, and if you're looking at YouTube videos and then you're doing some level design maybe in your free time, it's maybe stays a little bit on the theoretical level. So try to get in touch with other people who are maybe taking care of other parts of a game, maybe get in touch with people who want to maybe create a game and work with them, and then build your portfolio from there. So it's a good starting point, I think, but I think you can add on to this.
And you just quickly touched on the next question, actually, because it is, do modding experience increases chances to applying for a job in a game company with some spicy stuff made like rigging, animation, programming in different game engines?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely it's a good way to get practical experience. There are also some commercial games that started as a modding project. So yes, it's definitely relevant. And definitely something that is recommended if you need to start out, because if you don't have the experience to work in a gaming studio, you need to start somewhere. And modding, for example, is a great way to get practical experience, also to build a showcase, to build a portfolio for maybe the hiring teams. That is a way to start, of course.
Thank you. We have talked about evergreen jobs, but maybe there are also jobs of the future. Philip, what do you think are jobs of the future worth mentioning? A look into your fortune-telling crystal globe, maybe, and give us an insight on positions that are on the rise in development and might be more important in the future.
So I would say mostly it's the tools that keep changing and that keep incorporating new technologies, new ways of creating assets, for example, or code, or even levels that change the development process. So I think maybe as a first answer, I would say it's less the role itself or it's less new roles and more the existing ones that change, and that you have to stay on top of new tools that are on the rise, let's say. Like I think 10 years from now, the kinds of tools that artists will use may still be called the same, might still be your usual suspects, but they will obviously have vastly upgraded functionalities that today's artists can only dream of. So it's important to have access to those and to practice those. I think beyond that, I would say we're seeing more and more that big game companies like Ubisoft try to engage as soon as possible during the development process with their audience. And so anything that focuses on user research, early iterations, prototyping, maybe engaging with the audience in like a marketing sense, where it's less this sort of traditional marketing where you just take the finished product and then you adapt it to the market that you're trying to be more successful in, and more approaching it from a let's say having a more open relationship with your community, having a more, let's say, humanizing way of, hey, this is Peter, he's the programmer and he's working on this feature right now. Let's go talk to him. I think that way of communicating between companies and their audience is getting more traction. So I think that could be one. one job of the future, let's say, or let's say an evolution of what we have today. But yeah, certainly I think it's mostly about understanding what are modern and faster ways to create things.
Okay. And are there any positions that we currently have difficulties hiring?
I think it's often difficult to find your really specialized programmers. I think we often, when you need like an engine specialist or graphics programmer, sometimes that includes even UI programming. When as a project you have that need, it's often difficult to find them quickly. So I would say those are some examples. Sometimes that also includes your usability, your UX designers, because I think it's very important to surface all of the information that the game gives you to the players, and sometimes our games can feel, not as optimal as we would like, or where it feels clunky, and so that might be the result of that. So I think those are some examples.
We have a question in the chat that is fitting the first part of your answer. You said that we have difficulties hiring specialized programmers. We have a question in the chat of someone asking what would be the best thing to focus on when looking to apply into a game dev job for programming. Would you advise focusing more on C++ or other experiences? Because this person says that they usually don't use C++ and are focusing more on Java or C#.
So, I mean, first of all, we have programmers of all kinds and use all sorts of languages, but certainly C++ is the vast majority of the positions that we have, or the vast majority of programmers that work at Ubisoft are going to be using C++. So for most of the programming positions, a really solid foundation in C++ is going to be a baseline requirement. Of course, sometimes we also look for full stack developers, for Java developers for some of our tools, and then some games that are maybe made with Unity or other engines that use C#. So that exists. But again, C++ is just your kind of mainstay sort of bread and butter that most programmers will have to have. And I think I want to include something that Alex, that you said earlier, is that when you're looking for, okay, as a programmer, if I want to get into game dev, what should I practice? So C++ is one thing. Having a portfolio, having a GitHub or otherwise publicly accessible link where people can actually inspect your code and inspect sort of the way that you write and structure your code is going to be important. So I would encourage people to build that. And I would also encourage people to find ways to, seek your tribe. Look out for people that sort of think like you, that want to create something together with you, where you can practice collaborating. Because I would say, I would encourage people to think of any job family. Think of it like in music, right? In music, nobody knows the best solo drummer in the world, right? People remember the drummer of band X, right? So think of, if you're sitting at home, you're honing your own skills and you're reading books or watching YouTube videos, that's you practicing your instrument. And that's valuable, of course. But you need to make sure that you're also sort of putting yourself out there, that you get to know people that, eventually, if you keep game jamming with 20 people every year, eventually one of them is going to get a job, and then they're going to pull you in, for example. Just to kind of give an example of how these things work sometimes, right? So you have to sort of increase your surface area by networking, by getting to know people, and obviously by practicing. If I go back to the analogy, music in a band. That's how you learn that to create something. It's not necessarily about your personal skill or your personal best ideas, and more about how you're able to adapt to what other people are doing, and to, as a group, create something that's bigger than, let's say, the sum of its parts, right? That's when the magic happens. And in game dev, it's not, it's no different in game dev. So make sure that you're not just focusing on sort of honing your own art, your own craft, but that you also find ways to apply it in a collaborative setting, because I think that can make a big difference in your resume, and it will also make a big difference because you notice when you talk to people about, hey, have you done this in a group? Have you sort of worked with code of other people, for example, before? And so that's going to be, typically a question that comes up in the interview process.
We've talked a lot about like game jamming, networking, everything to gain some experience before starting the real job. Maybe you can just, because it's been floating around this whole stream, you can just sum it up. So what are concrete actions that you can do before applying for a job, like to gain experience, to get to know people? Alex, what are possibilities that young talents have?
Yeah, like Philip said, to put yourself out there, you can attend game jams, you can look for a group that maybe is modding a game you like, to join them, you can attend conferences, you can maybe volunteer at a conference just to get access to the conference and to maybe get involved with people. So these are all things you can do to expose yourself to the community, to work together on things and to gain that experience, to work on a portfolio, to build your networking skills, to build your team working skills, because this in the end will pay big dividends when you're finally applying then for a job in the gaming industry, because like Philip said, it's like playing in a band, playing in music. It's not about only playing like by your own rhythm that you're comfortable with. That maybe would be the case if you would be learning things all by yourself. You really need to learn how to interact and work with other people and how to making games a successful team effort. So this is very important, and those are options you have and you should definitely use if you're thinking about a career in the game industry. Yes.
Thank you. We have another interesting question in the chat, which is if we think, or if you think that it's necessary to implement the usage of AI into your workflows to keep up with the demand. What do you think?
Well, maybe that's also a good question for Philip. I think it has been a topic maybe for your teams as well that you've been thinking about.
So whether it's necessary to include AI, I don't know. I think it's a bit too early to say whether it's an absolute necessity. And I think we've seen great examples in the last years of games that maybe are being made with a more simplistic approach, games that come from the sort of indie space, that are not necessarily successful because of their vast amounts of content. Right. And I think similarly, I think in Ubisoft, we've also, we're making big games. We're also making some, let's say, smaller games. I'm a big fan of the latest Prince of Persia that I was playing on Switch, for example, which was a lot of fun. It's also not a game that, required like an army of artists to produce the content for. So I think it's going to depend on the kind of game that you're making. It's going to depend on what audience you're making it for. I think, like I said before, tools that we use to create content are going to evolve. And so staying on top of that and making use of them in ways that, obviously are ethical and make sense for us as a company is important. But yeah, I think it would be too early to say at this point that it's a necessity to include that. I don't think that's the case today.
Yes, thank you very much. And with that, we are actually approaching the end of today's stream because it's soon 3 p.m. Thank you, Alex and Philip. You did a great job in answering all the questions. We have learned about how Ubisoft produces its AAA games, and also what's the difference between smaller and bigger game projects. Also, we talked about the different jobs that are involved in game development, evergreens, job of the future, the needed skill set, also how to apply for a job at Ubisoft, what's important, how you can gain some experiences beforehand. And also, I would like to recommend the Game Campus from the German Games Association. I think the link was there in the chat already, but maybe we can drop it again. It's a very nice starting point for job orientation in the industry, and also it gives an overview of some examples of specific jobs. Also, if you're interested, you can check out our website, bluebyte.ubisoft.com, and under our engagement, you can find the dedicated pages for future talents. Sorry, a little heads up that the website will be updated very soon and then will contain even more valuable information. Yes, thanks everyone for listening, for asking questions, and I hope to see you again in the next edition of the Ubisoft lecture series, when we are going to start with these in-depth insights into different development aspects. And as a little teaser to close this session, next time we are deep diving into production even more. So stay tuned, have a great rest of the week, everyone, and bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.